Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to take a few minutes of your time just to go through some thoughts and some feedback on your Lab 1 assignments. I'm going to run through a few different people's labs anonymously that were submitted and highlight some things that were done well, some things that need improvement, just so we're all on the same page about expectations, about layout, about design, about some of these different things that I noticed on your first pass through the lab. The purpose of this is not to call anybody out or to um, make you feel bad if this is one of your maps that comes up and I highlight something that was done wrong, but it's really to illustrate where improvement can be made, and to make you better cartographers and designers as time moves forward. So if your map does come up and I call attention to a particular thing in a negative way, don't take that as an indication or a disappointment or whatever about yourself, just as part of the process, part of the review, critique, learning process. Um, yeah, so take that with in stride, I guess is the way to say it. One other thing I wanted to bring up yesterday when I was recording the Lab 2, the projections lab video, my cat was on my lap and my cat hit this button on my microphone that muted me right around here, about the 15-minute mark. I didn't realize that at the time, so I am muted for the last like 5 minutes of this video, which might be a good thing. Honestly, I didn't really say anything very important during the last 5 minutes. I was kind of rambling about projections and was, uh, yeah, it's not really anything at all. So the one thing that I did go through that you should pay note of is just this section here, the making the layout section. You know, I kind of went through the step by step here. Just read that and you should be in good shape. Okay. So I apologize. My cat is banned from my office when I'm making videos now, but she'll probably make her way back in because cats are sneaky like that. Okay, so let's look at a few maps and highlight a few things. All right. Let's just go. All right, so we have one here. Generally a well-designed map. One thing I noticed is that there is an imbalance in terms of the vertical symmetry. And by that I mean if you look at this line here, which we would call the neat line, right, which is kind of this border around the map, you have a lot more space on the bottom down here than you do on the top up here, right? And so that makes it so your map title is pretty compressed within the space at the top, but then your um, scale bar and your north arrow and some of these more superfluous elements have all this space to breathe down at the bottom, right? So you kind of have just a vertical imbalance is what I would call this. Not really a huge deal, um, but something that is noticeable for sure. So one of the things I like to do when I'm making my layout is just, even with your finger, you can put your finger up to your map and kind of try to get a sense of if you have equal buffer on each side, both the vertical dimensions and the horizontal dimensions. Another thing you can do is something simple like just add some shapes, some like little guiding boxes, or you can use the ruler and put guidelines on there. So, even something as simple as, and you can do this in ArcGIS as well. You can just kind of add, you know, a measure of how far you are from the top of the page to the top of your geographic element, right? And then if you copy that, and this is easier to do in like higher level design software like Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, is what I primarily work in and what we work in for advanced cartography. But you can do the same thing in Arc Pro for sure. And you can see, right, this is kind of the two boxes of the same size and how much difference there is between the top and the bottom of the United States, or you could visualize that like this, right? And so what you're aiming for is something a little bit more symmetrical in terms of its vertical orientation. If you look at the horizontal orientation, for example, right, much closer. So that's something that I always kind of strive for is, can I get symmetry kind of within the boundary of my map? So you have two different competing factors going on there, right? You have a square page that you're working on, and then you have a complex geographic shape. And so it's always kind of a push and pull about how you're going to balance that within the page. And sometimes there's an intentionality to put it left justified or right justified, and you can play around with your text and your other elements to do that. But in a case like this, right, where you just have like a pinching at the top and then an openness at the bottom, there's not really a need to have that sort of asymmetrical layout. So in most cases, I strive for symmetry, and if you're asymmetrical in your layout, it's best to do that with intentionality. Okay? So let's look at another one. Other than that, very small element, very well done map. Good job. A second one. This one looks just about perfect, right? It has the nice monochromatic design. Everything kind of matches in terms of symmetry, in terms of the color and the locator map to the label, etc. The only thing I saw on this one, this is kind of an easy thing to mess up, but one you have to be careful of, is that your scale bar down here looks like it's attached to the locator map as opposed to the United States, right? Probably you had the locator map as the active layer when you added the scale bar, and in doing so, it attached that scale to this map as opposed to your primary map. And you want your scale bar to be attached to your primary map. You don't need a scale bar for your locator map, but you do need one for the primary map, right? And so, it's about 30, what is it, like 31, 3,200 miles across the country, right? And this scale bar would indicate that it's much further than that. So one thing to be careful of, right, is to make sure that your scale bar matches or is the correct geography. All right. Next one. Another one that is pretty much perfect, and the one that I like about this a lot is kind of the stacking of the title on the top. Right, and so instead of having this in one line that kind of stretches all the way across the top of the page, or is a smaller font, now with the stacking of the title, you can have a longer, more descriptive font, or longer, more descriptive title with a large font, and not necessarily have that kind of stretching all the way across the top of the page like a banner, which typically doesn't look very good. So this is a nice job of making just kind of that simple decision to say I'm going to make this two lines instead of one line, and that kind of opens up some of the opportunities you have in your map design process. So good job on that one. Another one that at first glance I was like, oh, perfect, very good job. Then I noticed a simple typo up here at the top. So one thing just to always be mindful of is kind of look back at your text and make sure that everything is spelled correctly. An easy common mistake, and sometimes one of those ones that you don't see right away, and then kind of on second glance you're like, oh, there's a little mistake there. So other than that, nice color, nice balance, nice feel and aesthetic and all that. Just one little thing that keeps it from being perfect. All right, another map. This one, the problem that kind of jumps out right away is that it's unprojected. So if you look back at these maps, right, this is kind of the shape of the United States that we're always kind of going for, right? This is an Albers equal area conic projection. I think equal area is conic. And you can always tell that it's that kind of projection because it has this nice kind of like swooping, I think it's a conformal, Albers equal area conformal projection. Either way. See, I start rambling about projections and then nevertheless. Yeah, so this is the shape that we're generally going for when we get the map of the United States, or the continental United States, right? This nice kind of swooping down from the tip of Washington out here, right through the west. That's kind of the distinctive shape, and then a nice kind of compressed feel on the edges. Whereas if we have an unprojected map, right, we have this kind of bulge that goes out on the top here, and it feels kind of elongated and stretched out, and so not what we want. So, that's the first thing, is always make sure that you project your map. Everything else in this map is done pretty much perfect, right? Except it's unprojected, right? Which leaves it aesthetically not quite what we're looking for. See the difference? All right, another map. A couple issues here. One, in Arc Pro, if you still have your feature selected, like this one is here, right? When you export to your PDF, it's going to maintain that highlighting, that selection around your feature, right? So that highlighted feature will continue to be selected. Right? It was not what we want. We don't want that kind of blue highlight area that's synonymous with the feature being selected in ArcGIS to come into our map product. The other thing that you can tell here is that this map needs some transparency on the counties. So there's a couple different settings in exporting a PDF, and I went through this, I believe, in the previous video, or in the Lab1 video, about how to export PDFs to maintain transparency. So go back and review that. But this is a good example of what happens when you don't have that transparency. Then you have kind of too much complexity, or it gets a little muddy in these kind of complex coastline areas, right? So the southern coast of Maine, Puget Sound, Chesapeake Bay, Gulf Coast. All these places that have a lot of undulations and complex geometries to the coastline. Those places, if you're not using a soft transparency, or if you're using too thick of a stroke, then they're going to get all kind of muddled up and unpleasant looking, right? So another issue there, something to be mindful of. Then a third thing is, we want to try to avoid having non-intuitive scales, right? So if we have, like, the previous scale, 250, 500, 1,000 miles, we can kind of conceptualize what those numbers mean in a little bit more clear of a sense, right? They're round numbers, they're kind of flagship numbers, I guess, within our numerical scale. Whereas if we have these values here, 185, 370, 740, it's just a little less intuitive about what those values actually mean. So I try to always avoid having those non-round numbers on my scale. I try to keep it at, so it ends at 1,000, so it ends at 800, or something, that ends with 2 zeros, for example, is usually a good rule of thumb. And last thing, we want our locator map to be zoomed out enough, right? This locator map is to provide broader context, right? And so if we have a locator map that just simply shows the United States within the continent of North America, that's not really a whole lot of extra context, right? We don't really need a locator map for that. Whereas a locator map like this that shows the United States within the context of the globe provides a little bit more context and more indicative of what we're looking for with the locator map. So your locator map here is just a bit too zoomed in. Okay. Another example here of not quite having the correct symmetry between the northern and the southern extents, right? Or the top and the bottom of your map. Also here, the locator map is too zoomed in, and maybe the box for the locator map is a bit large itself, right? The locator map should be kind of a background, or like a subtle feature within the map, not something that takes up such a large percentage of your canvas that you're working on. So a couple things there. You can zoom out, and you can make the frame itself smaller. And then again, the scale bar, does not have those more intuitive numbers. And then you can see with the pinching of your northern border here, that your title is just kind of crammed in there, right? It doesn't really have space to breathe. And then Your legend has like all this kind of empty space around it. And then finally, here the selected features aren't isolated, so we wanted to have Canada removed from the equation, right? So the United States is just kind of floating out there in space. Um, one thing I try to avoid is putting my text cutting across geometry like this, right? It can just make your text hard to read and kind of unpleasant to read, right? When you have lines crossing over. And I'll show you guys later in the term how to do halos and pop outs and things like that allow you to kind of fade, have some sort of buffer around your lettering so it doesn't uh, conflict with the underlying geometry. But in this case, right, that's something that you want to avoid here, especially something like this up here. Again, the map is unprojected. And then another thing that, the reason I picked this map is that we want to avoid is having red-green combinations. So red-green is kind of the highest level of color blindness, or the most common color blindness that people have is a red-green, or inability to tell the difference between red and green. So if we have our two primary colors that we're using being red and green, that automatically kind of disservices a certain percentage of our intended audience. So we always want to be mindful of especially that red-green combination and try to avoid that as much as possible, because it does limit the limit the amount of people that could view this map in the way that we as the cartographer intend it to be viewed, right? So, there's just a couple notes that I have: symmetry, projection, uh, getting kind of that foreground and that background relationship, where you don't want to have your topology kind of interfering with your foreground text. Okay, so that's all I have for my reviews. Generally, you guys did a great job. Hopefully, you felt the software was easy to navigate and easy to manage. And each week, I'll try to give you some feedback on, the good and the bad that I see in your labs. So, appreciate the time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and yeah, just send me an email if you have any questions about your Lab 2. All right, enjoy the weekend. Bye.